We were just saying, well, first of all, welcome to this merry band of peoples here. I'm Capt Ron, and this is Fearless Flight Live for the week. Up here, here is Dieter. Down here is Diane, and over here is Eric. Welcome, everybody. This is our weekly show to help people who have a fear of flying, who maybe know somebody who has a fear of flying, or if you just like to talk about aviation and gee whiz, the way airplanes work and fly. So welcome, everybody. We were just commenting that I think would be more interesting to everybody if we launch the show in the 10 minutes before we launch the show, then you'd have we'd be ripe for a lot more laughs, I'm sure. But
you'd be terrified.
We do have fun, so we're going to try to keep doing that. Next there, you see on the screen is our pitch that we make every week. If you have not joined Fearless Flight Birds of a Feather, we really encourage you to do that. It's a great place to share your story, to get support from other people, and to communicate with each other. So have a link or have a stab at that, and introduce yourself, and we'll pull you into the group. Last week, we said, once again, because this whole COVID thing is developing a life of its own, and we wanted to just see where you all were at with flying. So we have some results from those of you who, thank you, responded last week, and put your preferences in there. We'll show you that in just a minute. And then we're going to talk about something that we use all the time in the classes, and I use in coaching, a formula that we have called E+R=O. And then we have a couple aviation news roundup articles from the week that filter in this, and hopefully you'll see the connection with all of this. And if you don't, it's Eric's fault, because he was supposed to make that happen.
And a previous guest on our show, the esteemed Jim Duke, said that our green room talks are a lot of fun, and he would know that. So
yes, yeah. And most of the time they're PG-13 at the worst. So
yes.
Yeah, for maybe like 3 seconds, and then they quickly go to MA, and then you find out that an F-bomb is a verb, a noun, a pronoun, a dangling participle. It's
X-rated.
Yes, it's every part.
And a term of endearment too.
All at once.
If F-bombs were not allowed, pilots would be speechless in the cockpit.
No.
So,
All right, do we want to go to something a little bit more scientific here?
Probably.
We do.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
we're all sitting on the edge of our chairs, waiting for the results, and there they are. So the 4 choices you had is, when do you see yourself flying again? We're by spring break of next year, summer vacation-ish in the middle of next year and beyond, not until there's a vaccine, and 2022 and beyond. And you can see pretty evenly divided for next spring, next summer and beyond. And a majority of people want to see a vaccine before we get there. I listened to a podcast with an immunologist from Yale University, a fascinating guy. It sounded quite authoritative. He has several works published, and he's been consulted by hospitals and the government. And he said that one of the things I found interesting was, he said that in terms of when it's going to be safer out there, he said if the vaccine were out tomorrow, it takes about 45% of the population, either a combination having been infected with the disease and developed immunity that way, or the vaccine, before the threat really starts to go down. And he felt that was going to be by 2022. And I didn't know any better, but I've always intuitively, that's my elephant brain, right? Remember that? The elephant brain that doesn't know squat, but it says that must be right because I thought of it. That my elephant brain kind of intuited that it's going to be later rather than sooner before we can start to get back to normal. And even then, that's not going to be as normal as we'd like it. And he said probably that'll get us to the mid-range of the infection, and beyond is going to be probably 2024, when we now can talk about the dreaded COVID-19 pandemic of 2021. Go ahead, Eric.
Hey, Ron, did you read all that on the internet?
I did, and you know it was true because it said it was true
Because it
right
was
there.
on the internet.
Yeah, actually, it came through the internet to the podcast. So
Okay.
yeah,
Just checking.
that's a good point. We're we want to kind of, that's kind of thematic tonight because we're going to talk about E plus R equals O. Where do we get the ideas that we get the ideas from, and what are those ideas? So I'd like to make a case for trying to be more mindful. And I've known that there's many more ways for mindfulness to be useful to all of us here than just overcoming a fear of flying. It's how we become more aware. It's how we slow ourselves down. Even now, I'm telling myself, don't go off a mile a minute like you usually do. Calm down a little bit. So change your story, change your life. That brings us to this formula that I stole from a guy named Jack Canfield, who stole it from somebody else. I don't even remember. And you can read it in various applications on the interweb, as Eric would say. So it's a simple formula, and you don't have to know much math to get it right. E plus R equals O. You add those two components together and you get O. Well, E represents the event, situation, or circumstance, which you'll know is part of our definition of fear of flying, right? That's what, it's when you're confronted with events, situations, circumstances that seem life-threatening and combined with helplessness. That's the definition of how you're afraid to fly. So we've kind of integrated that into there. But anyway, E represents something that happens to you. All right. And it doesn't matter. It's not in your control. It's something that is outside of your control. R is your response, or our response to that. And I put usually a story that we tell ourselves, and that's the manifestation of the R. But when something happens, we immediately, as human beings, try to make sense out of it. That's how we're wired. We got that from our ancestors. And then O is the outcome. In the case of fear of flying, it's the affect with which we are left, at the very least. So I use an example sometimes about self-esteem. So Eric's one of my good friends, so we'll use Eric. So if if Eric was a fearful flyer, let's say.
I can still hear you,
Oh, okay.
All right.
And he were sitting in the classroom, I would give the example of how E plus R equals O. So I'd say, okay, tell me after I get done here, whether Eric's self-esteem should go up or would go down. And I would say, Eric, you've been coming to the classes religiously, and I've gotten to know you a little bit, but I hate to tell you this, buddy, but you're kind of like, missing some of the bulbs in your pack there. And I don't think it's gonna work all that well for you. So you might consider doing something else. So,
you mean I'm a short bus fearful flyer?
Yeah. So when I tell Eric that, or approach Eric with that, is his self-esteem going to go up? And you can put this in your response places there, or is it going to go down? I'll give you a couple of seconds to do that.
It's a toughie.
Put it in chat.
So the answer is, people usually say, because it has kind of a derogatory tone to it, people normally say, well, his self-esteem is going to go down. But if you use the formula, that's not true. When confronted with me kind of assaulting him verbally, okay, it's how Eric responds. It's the story that Eric tells himself about me using him as an example that makes the difference whether his self-esteem goes up or down. If he takes it personally, which we tend to do as human beings, and particularly if he didn't know me that well, he might say, geez, what did I do to him? Or he might internalize it even more and say, wow, I can't believe he saw that foible in me so quickly. But since Eric knows me and we have a pretty long-standing relationship here, he more likely will say to himself, I know Ron's using me as an example because one, he knows I got a sense of humor, and two, he knows that we can banter about each other and kid, because that's what we do as in our friendship. So the point is the story is what makes the difference in our lives. So now we're going to keep that in mind. You can use an aviation example. If you're bothered by takeoff, for example, and that's, people will tell me, when I ask, what bothers you about fear of flying? And they say, well, I don't like the takeoff. Well, that's a whole array of possibilities there. So I ask them to get more specific. So asking them is I'm asking them for the trigger that triggers their activity, their fight or flight response. And I'm asking them to be as specific as possible. And in some cases, they'll say, well, we get airborne, but it feels like the airplane is struggling. And this is something that's kind of common with a lot of fearful flyers who have mechanical fears. They're worried more about the flying and all that. Is people, for whatever reason, I think it has to do with just the shaking and the vibration going down the runway. You think that this, may be in fact put together with baling wire and duct tape. And so when it gets into the air, will it stay there? And so if the story that you're telling yourself is that vibration, that uncertainty that I find myself confronted with when I'm walking down or running down the runway, that's going to result in an outcome. I'm not going to feel good about that. Okay. And so that's the point at which we teach people not only to do an intervention on themselves, but where we can help them with an intervention until they get some practice. That's what I do in the coaching, anything from the 15-minute coaching call to people that sign on for one-to-one private coaching. So it's the story that we tell ourselves. And when we're going to talk about some highlights here out of the news this week, and I want you to keep that in the back of your mind. Always when you think about not just flying, but anything in life, if you find yourself affected emotionally, try to identify what's the story that you're telling yourself about that. Is it true? How do you know it to be true? And that goes back to what Eric and Diane commented on before, and that is make sure that when you're reading stuff that it's authentic. And we've always asked for years, we ask you if you have any questions about flying or articles that come up about flying, about crashes in the news, to approach us directly. And Eric was we'll wait till we get to the slide there. So if you have any comments on that, we'd love to have them, and we'll try to identify them and address them before the end of the show. So let's put the.
Do we know any pilots who don't take criticism personally? Have we ever met one?
I don't know many people who don't take criticism personally.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah.
I mean, Ron,
and it's very difficult.
The pilot would be out in the parking lot vandalizing his car, and he'd feel really good about it. His self-esteem would go up. The more damage he did.
I'll tell you, I have a personal story on that. When my daughter was 19, she had just moved out. I had just gotten married, a second marriage, about a year before. She lived with us part-time, and then she moved out, and it was a struggle. I mean, I'll tell you, it's the hardest thing in the world is to do a blended family, and nobody knows where the other people are and all that. So she had become estranged, would be a mild way to put it. And so I would get together with her every year, and we'd have a birthday luncheon with her, just her and I. And so this one particular day, I remember we're sitting at an Olive Garden outdoors, and the weather was nice and everything. And she comes, and I could tell she was really like a buzzsaw. She was not happy. And so she sat down, and I was trying to find something light to talk about. And everything was met with a big wall. And so I said to her, Shelley, is this the way that our relationship is going to be for the rest of our lives together? And she said, I'm not doing any freaking counseling. She knew exactly what was in the back of my mind. And so then one of my wisest times in my life, usually I'll come right back with something. I just sat there with the silence for a minute. And then in the silence, she then volunteered. She said, I'll pick the frickin' counselor. Okay. So that lightened the whole load there. So anyway, the point of the story is when we get into counseling, she does a little individual work. I've been working with my guy. We get together. They happen to be a married couple. And so now we're in this get together. She's been up to about 6 sessions or so. And the counselor says, Shelley, and you can tell she's nervous. We're all nervous because we don't want to talk. The elephant's bigger than all get out in the room. Nobody wants to talk about what could come up here. And so she said, Shelley, is there something you wanted to tell your dad? So she starts out, she gets her little list out, and you could tell she's just on the edge of tears already. And so the first thing she said, when she was a freshman in high school, the airline that I worked for, Frontier Airlines, the original one up in Denver, went broke. So I was without a job, and that meant definitely relocating or commuting. And I didn't want to commute because I'd seen a lot of pilots commute, and it's very difficult to have a family life when you're flying, and much more difficult when you're commuting. So anyway, so the first thing she said was, well, it was really hard, Dad, when we had to move and I was a freshman in high school. So I immediately come out and I said, oh, gee, Shell, that was because I was trying to keep the family together and all that. Now, in my mind, up until that point, the whole reason that I had that story was I'm telling myself, I want to make her feel better. What my guy pointed out, he just tapped me on the shoulder and he said, just listen, Ron. Changed my life. Now, some people wouldn't believe that because it's still hard to integrate that sometimes. But the point is I was telling her, I was trying to attend to her under the belief that I was doing for her. What I was really doing was trying to make myself feel better, because I instantly personalized her feelings and my circumstances. That's not to say that I don't have compassion for her and what it was like and all that, but the point was just to listen to her. And how we do that sometimes, what I found was I make the story about me, even though it's all clouded in nice stuff and psychobabble and stuff like that. Sometimes it really wasn't about me. It was about her, and I was there to listen. So personalizing is something that I'm very familiar with. And I can tell that if I'm defensive, the other person might as well stop, because there's no good going to come out of the conversation, because I'm defending myself and because it's become personally and with other people. So
I should point out to you, you did not take credit for not pointing out to her that the situation, you are now on the edge of living inside or outside. And that was in doubt. That yes, you ruined her entire high school life, but it was in doubt. I mean, I remember the Frontier thing. All that was very much in doubt on whether or not you were going to get paid or not. Yeah.
And there's a time for that. There's a time for that, but this wasn't the time. And my counselor just tapped me on the shoulder and said, just listen, Ron. So Shelly and I went on to improve our relationship. And one of the things that I was able to share with her is when she says to me, we have a sign. So if she goes timeout, like in a basketball game, I know, in the past, I would think, oh, gee, what did I do wrong? Now I think, oh, God, she's going to make it easy for me. All I got to do is listen. And it really changed our relationship. And I use that a lot when I'm working with people who are afraid to fly. I listen to their story, and oftentimes stories about flying come from bad experiences. And oftentimes they come from bad experiences that weren't even related to flying. And they internalize a lot of the stuff. A lot of shame goes on, and people get stuck there all the time. So, okay, maybe more than you ever wanted to know, but how to listen to my kid, and it made a difference. So, okay.
You think Peter passed out?
No, because he just moved the slide. I can tell he's alive because the slides are moving. So this is just to remind us gosh, I wish we were getting bonus points from the airlines for pumping the industry here, but this just says the airlines are now looking at 2-for-1 deals to drum up demand. I told you last week or 2 weeks ago when I went to Hawaii, was a very, very open airplane. There were on the way over was about 25% full, and on the about a third full, and on the way back was about 25% full. So there are some good deals out there. I still support you if you don't have a real need to fly. Why bother? But if it's it's something that you've been wanting to do and you've been pushing it off, we can give you some guidelines on how to do it safely. And there are some terrific deals out there. And that's what the point of that podcast I was telling you about, how long this is going to be for the recovery. The airlines are going to change over this time, because it's going to be a long time before they get back to the revenue streams that they are. And Diane mentioned she works for a regional jet, and so your loads don't reflect that.
No. I fly with a regional, and we partner with 4 different mainline carriers, and our flights are full. I don't want to say every single seat, depends on the flight, the market, where we're going. But my aircraft are pretty much either completely full or very close to full on all of our flights.
Yeah.
I just had a 3-day trip and then a local, which is down and back to one city. And most of them on my 65 passenger aircraft are, and again, anywhere from 50 to 63 passengers. So again, it depends on where you're flying and when you're flying. Obviously, a lot of it has to do with the fact, as we have talked about, instead of 3 or 4 or 5 different flights per day from Phoenix to a certain market, there may be only 2. And so those planes obviously are going to be full. But we're expanding the number of flights to different places, and even those planes are full. And so those of us that fly in regional, because we're more efficient, we can fill up our plane instead of having, as Ron was saying, instead of having a plane with 200 seats, maybe only 40 of them are occupied. Ours are more efficient. So there's a lot of the shifting, I suppose, of the filling of the aircraft to the smaller planes, to a lot of the same markets. We're going to a lot of hubs, a lot of big cities. So you do need to, when you're booking a ticket on all the airlines, they'll tell you, this particular flight is operated by, and it might be operated by a different regional. And so you can go through the exercise of seeing what kind of plane you're going to be flying on, whether or not it's a big plane or a smaller plane.
And this goes back to what Eric and I and Diane and Dieter were talking about when we started here, is that it's interesting. We can't even remember when we got a question in the recent past about a plane crashing, or I don't like to fly on little airplanes. Now it is whether I want to fly at all. So Anyway, and I think that'll lead us into our next slide there, Dieter, if I guess correctly. Yes,
You did.
Is a fear of flying ground. And so this was an article that just basically talked about that phenomenon. It says, people aren't talking about fear of flying anymore because they're not talking about flying. So I can continue to say that I'm seeing some people sign up for 15-minute coaching sessions. I had a couple last week, and I'm seeing that grow. People doing some things, and the kinds of coaching that I've been doing lately, or the nature of the calls, are for people. One is a young woman who lives in Puerto Rico who has to, or wants to go see her father, who's undergoing cancer surgery down in Houston. So obviously something that's very important to her, and a good reason to fly. The other one is a young man in let me think where he is. He's up in the Northwest, and he's headed to Ghana, of all places, for his job.
Wow.
And so both of them are very motivated to fly, and so they felt kind of thrust into this. They've got to deal with their fear of flying, and so I'll be helping them. We hope that you will start coming out. It's a great time to work on issues related to fear of flying.
Yeah, Ron, I want to.
Yeah, one second. So most of you, I know, wait until, like an allergy, the closer you get to the airplane and the flight, the more you're worried about it. But we can make a good case that the time to work on it is when you're not under that kind of pressure. So go ahead, Peter.
Well, you just made a case for entrainment, and that some of you who are into music know that too. The vibration of two combining in such a way that it enhances the entire experience. And I was just thinking about exactly what you said, Ron. It's like an analogy, right? Nobody's flying. Hey, wait, I have no fear of flying anymore. I'm anxious as heck in all these other areas, but because we're not really into the whole flying part, and there was a conversation in one of the threads going towards that, how it's not something that you're thinking about right now, but if you do have either some time on your hand through some of the limitations that might have happened in your life, or opportunity to not just schedule, but create a plan, a flight plan. We talk about this all the time. Now is the time, because the time will come when you will have to fly, will want to fly, need to fly. And at that point, you know, it's really hard to catch up. And so now might be, you know, instead of crisis mode, it might actually be time for a really good approach, creating a solid kind of plan. And that's what we're here to help you. So ask your questions. And
we are creatures of crisis. We love to avoid making any changes until we absolutely positively have to. But there is some merit to working on things. And that's why Dieter and I are trying to expand the kind of information we put out here. This isn't just about flying and anxiety or anxiety due to flying. This is about life stuff. And both of us have quite a bit of experience. Dieter certainly as much as I do in helping people out there. So we and when we make the pitch for trying to identify the story. Most of us, especially Fear Flying, because the two people that I worked with this last week, I asked them, so what's the story you tell yourself? Most of them are unaware that there is even a story going on. So the way the brain works is when you hit turbulence and that's one of your triggers, all of a sudden you just feel overwhelmed with these negative, dreadful feelings. And so when you ask people, what's the story you're telling yourself? They don't have any recollection of any story going on. Yeah. But at the simplest version of that story is something or anything that makes me feel so dreadful must be putting me in jeopardy. And of course, it's not true at all. But that can open up more questions related to that, like how does an airplane withstand turbulence? What do pilots do? Are they up there fighting the controls like a Gary Larson joke? No, we're up there usually on autopilot, telling stories to each other. Trying to eat, trying to drink.
Yeah, I know. That's the hard part, is trying to eat. I had, on my last trip, on one of the legs, it turned out I had two passengers who had never flown before. And one young fellow, a young man who was 14. And I had an opportunity to talk with him. And I asked him, and he said, asked him whether or not he was nervous and how he felt about it. And he said he was a little nervous. And so I asked him, well, tell me what you're thinking. And he talked about turbulence. And so I went into one of the descriptions that I particularly love, that I have a tendency to use an example of driving a car because I like to drive. And so I put a lot of those things in analogy. And so we talked about speed bumps and going over a speed bump at 5 miles an hour versus 60 miles an hour. And he sat there and he smiled and he could understand that. He could really understand how the difference felt of being in a plane going 400 plus knots and going over speed bumps. And it seemed really to help him as far as understanding the mechanics, if you will, of what the turbulence was and how turbulence is not going to, it's annoying, as you've always said, but it's not dangerous. And so those kinds of stories, I gave him a different story. I gave him a different story to think about.
Wow,
that opens up a different context, so that he literally has the option now down the road of seeing himself in a car rather than an airplane, and it's a familiar setting, and that may help. So it's a good job. So okay, how about the next slide? And I think
let me just get into some of the chat. So first of all, Susan said, Diane, that's for you. Yeah. So just kind of let it wash over you. Not to change the subject, but not all flight attendants are as nice as you are.
Is this where we say, Eric? Is this where we say, well, you really don't know Diane that well enough? She's not that nice. Oh no.
Well,
that's it.
And this is
nothing, Colonel. Nothing.
I know nothing.
This is where the power of socialization comes in, because most of us don't even try to engage a flight attendant or the pilots when we start, so we never really get to know. But you're right, Susan, you can get somebody having a bad day or a bad lifetime, and what can I say? Let it go.
Let it go. And I will tell you, I think of myself as a very nice person, but I will tell you that when a passenger gets on a plane, and certainly for those of us who do what we do, you need to understand and be appreciative and embrace customer service, because that's safety. Safety is always number one. Everybody needs to understand that, is safety is number one. And then certainly customer service and making sure everyone has an enjoyable flight is number two. But being human, if you are on day 4 and you're going to have 16 flights and 16 legs over the course of 4 days, and the 3 mornings you have to get up, you're getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning because the van picks you up at the hotel at 5 because you have the very first flight of the day. Even the very best of us on occasion can have a bad day.
Yeah, your fun meter gets pegged after a while.
The fun meter gets pegged. And we don't mean to be mean by any means, but we are human. And there is when we're exhausted, and trust me, by day 4, very often we're pretty much I've been exhausted. That our cheerful meter might kind of be down in the red zone, which is, and I want to apologize for all flight attendants to all passengers who've had that difficult situation, but it really, really does happen. And we don't mean it to be that way. But again, our first priority is safety. And so that usually has a tendency to kind of wash past
the social
pictures of the
edges.
flight attendants in the
yeah,
brochure.
there you go, Dieter.
The social edges.
The pictures of the flight attendant in the brochures were taken on day 1,
Yeah.
not day 4.
Day 1. I've described it. I have day 1 hair, day 2 hair, day 3 hair, and then I have day 4 hair, which means I really need to go home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you still give out those little what Jim said? Jim asked that question. Little plastic wings to kids and young.
No, we don't have those. We
I
don't have
pretty
those
much.
yeah.
That tells you the state of the airline budget for the last 30 years.
Right.
They did away
I
with
don't even know if
plastic
the
wings
main
that
lines
probably
do that.
it
Yeah.
probably cost 100 of them cost $1 maybe.
Yeah.
Or something like that.
I don't
Yeah.
know if. Yeah.
And last but not least, did any one of you watch The Hummingbird Effect? It's a movie that Michelle, one of our viewers, was putting in the chat, and they apparently have a really, I guess, very activating fear of flying scene when the pilots announced that there's turbulence coming up or something. The main character goes into some panic, and it's a quite well done scene apparently.
We have mentioned a technique, a strategy as a fearful flyer before, that if you go down to Starbucks and you get, say a half a dozen of the $5 gift cards or so, it's not below the flight attendants and the crew to be your best friend for us.
Your best friend, absolutely.
Yeah. So that's something to think. Okay, so we'll move into the close, and that's on the last slide here refers to an article about misperceptions, which we touched on a little bit ago earlier, about the whole thing about the misperceptions out there of the COVID risk. You really have to be careful what you read and who you talk to on this. And in this particular article, the thing that struck me the most is they quote the doctor. If you've been with us for the last 3 weeks, we've talked about that study that the Department of Defense did about, and Boeing, they did it jointly, about how low your risk is of actually getting the coronavirus number 19 when you're in flight. And there was a doctor named Friedman that was part of the research, and he's quoted in this article as saying, "Hey, that you need to rethink that." And Eric last week tried to go in more depth on this. He said one of the things is in a Department of Defense study, the first thing is that you can count on them being more objective than if it was an airline paying for the study, because the Department of Defense contracts for a lot of commercial flight every year, and both whole airplanes and selling seats on airplanes. And so you can count that they're there more likely to act in your best interest than if the study was being paid for by the airlines. And so if you recall, this particular individual was on this team that did this, and he didn't want to sign the report because he felt that they didn't address some of his concerns as much. And we pointed out that, yeah, those are valid concerns. However, again, the things you want to know is find somebody that knows more about this than you. And that's hard sometimes, especially if you get it off the internet. But if you look at the other articles that we've referenced over the past weeks and compare it to this one, you'll start to get a more complete picture of that. And you'll be able to make an informed decision, a better informed decision than you will if this is the only thing you look at. You just see that title there and say, well, you know, how can I trust them, or who can I trust? You need to go deeper. And I adopted this in my own life. If you want to make an informed decision, you've got to inform yourself. And it's very difficult. And the more information that we have, the more difficult it is, because we feel overwhelmed and inundated by too much information. And after a while, we just kind of give up and say, yeah, I'll go with Eric's opinion. He kind of does this stuff. So anyway.
He's a good guy.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks for paying attention and joining us tonight. If you missed us tonight because you thought it was last night, sorry.
Yeah, we
We'll be back.
definitely noticed there's a lot less of you watching because it's a Wednesday.
Yeah.
But that's part of the algorithm too. And I wanna just say that because we have this conversation about installing positive habits, which are really like algorithms that kind of feed on themselves, but with the mindfulness kind of steering it in the right direction. I mean, that's really, because we don't want to become habitually grateful and not really, for example, receive it in our bodies, right? And the way I grew up, I would call it a Catholic prayer. You know, you just do lip service so you get it over with, and then you're out the door, you know, like that's how we grew up as kids.
Yes, I know that one.
Yeah.
There were those speed bumps that we had to manage, you know. So
In retrospect, we might have been just as well off to hold the thing last night, because nothing happened until a little bit later, like Friday as it is. So, but that's another problem. So anyway, well, thanks for joining us. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate. If you want a 15-minute coaching session, look in the notes here. That's easy to do. I'm not overbooked yet. I'm ready, able, and willing to do that. So keep coming back to the show every week. We really appreciate your loyalty and staying with us. And again, thanks to Diane and Eric and Dieter for helping me put this together and make it less boring than if I was just doing it by myself. So anyway, so thanks everybody, and stay safe out there, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
all right, good night. And that's right, Sue.